So as you heard today, I want to talk with you a little bit about Judas. And I've been thinking about this message for the last week or so. I've had four sentences just sort of rattling around in my brain that I can't get out of my mind. And they may seem a little strange to you at first, but they've actually come to form the outline of my message to you today. And so let me just start by sharing these four little sentences with you, and then we can talk about them a little bit. Okay? Here's the four sentences. The four sentences are these. I love Judas. I hate Judas. I am Judas. I need Judas. That's basically my whole message in a nutshell. I love Judas. I hate Judas. I am Judas. I need Judas. Let's talk about it. First of all, I love Judas. And that sounds strange, right? I mean, what do you mean you love Judas? Nobody loves Judas. You can't love Judas. Judas is just like one of the worst guys of all time. Judas betrayed our Lord Jesus for money, and not even very much money. So you don't get much worse than that. So how can you love Judas? Well, of course, I don't love him for that, right? I don't love what he did at all. What he did was just horrific and despicable and evil. But what I mean is, if I search my heart and what's going on inside of me as we hear his story read again, I realize that, in fact, I do love Judas for this one reason. And maybe you do too. Judas makes me feel a whole lot better about myself, right? Because Judas is just so bad that in comparison, I think I look pretty good. See, if I don't have Judas, well, I don't often feel very good about myself. I mean, I look at my life and I can be pretty disappointed. I'm not the husband I would like to be. I'm not the father I would like to be. I'm not the pastor I would like to be. I'm not the son or the brother or the friend I'd like to be. Now, I don't think I'm the worst in the world at any of those things. I don't think I need therapy. But in almost every aspect of my life, I look and I often think to myself, I could be a lot better than that. And I should be better than that. And I wish I was better than that. But I'm not. And nothing helps me out of that funk more than Judas. Because I can look at Judas and all these terrible, awful things that he did, and I say to myself, well, at least I've never done that. Because Judas not only betrayed Jesus, Judas betrayed Jesus intentionally, right, with forethought and purpose. I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but look carefully here at what Matthew 26 says. It says, then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, what are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you? Now, do you see what that's telling you? It's telling you betraying Jesus was Judas's idea. He went to them, not the other way around. Right? It wasn't that the chief priests had this betrayal idea all cooked up, and then they went to Judas and tempted him and pressured him and threatened him until he finally broke and said, oh, okay, I'll do it. No, Judas conceived this. Judas wanted to do this. Judas initiated this. So this was not just a sin of weakness. This was an intentional, premeditated betrayal. And when I realize that, I feel a whole lot better about myself. I mean, don't you? I love Judas. But then I ponder his story a little more, and I realize not quite that simple. Because one of the things that is truly scary about this story isn't even what Judas did, but the fact that what he did came as a total surprise to everyone. No one, except for Jesus, saw this coming at all. So Judas may be like the ultimate bad guy to all of us, but we have to see he was not that to the other disciples. In fact, he was just the opposite. Elsewhere in the Gospels, we learn that Judas was the treasurer of the disciples. He was the one who collected and took care of and expended the money that they used to sustain themselves as they went around and Jesus taught and healed. And this is a critical detail, I think, because what kind of people do people pick to be the treasurer of their little group? It's always someone who is smart and trustworthy and reliable, right? I mean, if you had suspicions about somebody's character, even a little bit of suspicion, the last thing on earth you would do is make them the treasurer for your group. So Judas may be pure evil to all of us, but he was the exact opposite to them. And by the way, you see this very clearly at the Last Supper. Remember, Jesus says to them, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. And how did they react to that? Did they all suddenly turn to Judas with a knowing glance that just said, we knew that sooner or later you were going to do something like this? No, not a single person did that. That wasn't even remotely on their radar. Judas was the last person they would have thought would have done something like that. In fact, here's how the Gospel of John records this moment at the Last Supper. It says, so Jesus told Judas, what you're about to do quickly. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him, of all people. And that's why I say, second point, I hate Judas. And again, I don't mean I hate what he did, although I do hate what he did. What I mean by this is I hate Judas because Judas exposes to me that my real sinfulness is always on the inside, not the outside. Here's another example from the life of Judas that comes much earlier. In John chapter 12, Jesus is having dinner with some of his good friends, Lazarus and Mary and Martha. And you'll remember that Mary, in the midst of dinner, breaks open this bottle of expensive perfume, and she begins to anoint Jesus' feet with it. And then John says this, but one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. But then in the next verse, reflecting now on these events, many years later, John adds this comment. He says, but he did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Oh, I hate Judas. Because Judas' sin exposes my own. Because you see, the real problem with you and me isn't even what we do wrong or what we fail to do that's right. I mean, if that's all it was, this really wouldn't be that big of a problem, sin, but it's much more serious than that. The real problem is never with our hands. It's always with our hearts. Even when we do the right things externally, we can still be very far from God and His ways internally. As Isaiah says, even all our righteous deeds are like filthy rags. Our righteous deeds. I was thinking about this. I remember years ago at a former church I belonged to, we had this great idea that we were going to celebrate God's gift of marriage. We looked around, like maybe many of you do too, and we saw there's so many marriages today that are struggling and failing, and we thought, maybe our people could benefit from having some better role models for marriage. We said, we need to lift up for the congregation some good examples of marriage for people to emulate. And it just so happened we had a handful of couples in our congregation at that time who had been married for like 50 years or more. And so we thought to ourselves, let's put a group together, let's make some videos of these couples, have them share their stories and their secrets of marital success. And all of this sounded really, really good until I started looking at the actual list of names of people who had been married for 50 years or more. Because I knew these couples pretty well, and not a one of them had a marriage that I thought anyone would want to emulate. With every single one of them, it was well known to everyone in the congregation that while they may have gutted out 50 years together, they really didn't love each other very much. And they really didn't treat each other very well. And so we scrapped the whole idea, never did it. And that sounds like Judas, doesn't it? On the outside, everything looked great. But the inside did not match up at all. And the scary truth, friends, is that we can all be like that. And we are like that. And that's my third point, because as I think about him more, I realize more and more, I am Judas. We all are. And I think that's actually where Matthew wants to lead us eventually. We didn't read this verse earlier, but right after Matthew tells about Judas coming and betraying Jesus with a kiss, he says one more thing that's very interesting. Jesus is arrested and led away, and then Matthew ends the story like this. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. See, Matthew won't let us get away with reading Judas's story and then feeling really good about ourselves in comparison to him. Oh no, all the disciples deserted him and fled. And of course you have too. You may not have done exactly what Judas did, but really the truth is you're not all that different. And where you really see this best, I think, again, is at the Last Supper. And I got to tell you, I've read this story, maybe like many of you, like 1,000 times in my life. But this time around, I noticed something about this story that I had never seen before, and I don't know how I've ever missed it. Because I had always thought that what happened at the Last Supper was this, that Jesus stood up and said, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. And then they all said, oh, surely not I, Lord. Is that what you thought happened? It's not. That's not what they all said. It's what they all said except for Judas. Take a very careful look again. Jesus says, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. And then verse 22 says, they were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, surely not I, Lord. But verse 25 says, then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, surely not I, Rabbi. You see it? There's a very small but critical difference between what Judas said and what everyone else said. Judas was the only one who wouldn't call Jesus Lord. Everyone else said, surely not I, Lord. But Judas said, surely not I, Rabbi. And you know what else? Read through all four of the Gospels in their entirety and you'll find out never once does Judas ever call Jesus Lord. Now, why is this important? Well, because Lord, of course, means master. Right? Lord means I'm acknowledging that you're in charge of me. If you're the Lord, then I do what you say. Right? You're the boss. You call the shots. But rabbi simply means teacher. Now, a rabbi is someone I respect, to be sure, right? I mean, it's someone I listen to. It's someone whose opinions I consider, maybe strongly consider. But a rabbi is not a lord. If I don't like what the rabbi has to say, then I just go and do what I want. And isn't that what we all do with Jesus? I mean, we respect him, we listen to him, we consider his opinions, maybe even strongly consider them, but then so often we go and do whatever we want, whether Jesus would like it or not. Oh, Jesus wants us to be married before we sleep together? Oh, that's so old-fashioned. Jesus wants us to go to worship every single week. I mean, does he not realize how busy people are today? Jesus wants me to give generously and sacrificially. I mean, why? I'm doing a lot better than other people. Jesus wants me to share my faith with non-Christians. I mean, don't get me wrong, great idea, Rabbi, that's a great idea. And, maybe someday I'll feel comfortable doing that. So we justify it in 1,000 different ways, but the bottom line is we're not doing what Jesus wants. And worse than that, we don't even care. Because he's just a rabbi. He's become our advisor, but he's not the Lord Jesus. See, we may hate Judas, we may love Judas, but the one inescapable fact is that we are Judas. And that's why, final point, I need Judas. And so do you. Because Judas's story actually shows us the gospel of Jesus Christ in a way that no one else's does. Because you see, there's at least one more small but critical detail in Judas's story that you may never have noticed before, even if you've read it 1,000 times. And here it is. This is Matthew 26, verse 49. It says, going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. And Jesus replied, "Friend, do what you came for." You see it? It's not in what Judas says to Jesus, but in what Jesus says to him. Jesus calls Judas friend. Friend, do what you came for. Now remember, Jesus is the one person here who is not in the dark. Right? Jesus knows exactly what is happening here. He knows exactly what Judas has done even better than Judas does. He knows that this close friend and confidant, the one they had all trusted with their money and livelihood, has not only betrayed him, he has set in motion a series of events that no one's going to be able to stop now. One that Jesus knows full well is going to soon lead to his torture and excruciating death. And knowing all of that, what does Jesus call him? Friend? Oh, my friends, we need Judas. Because if Jesus can call Judas his friend, even after all he's done, then you can also know this for sure, that there is no sin you could ever commit no temptation you could ever fall into, no failure you could ever cause that will not also be met with an offer of grace from Jesus. If Judas was still his friend, then you are still his friend, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter how you've failed. And yet it's even better than that. Because Judas's story teaches us something else. That even your worst failure does not derail God's plan and purpose, not one single bit. Come with me back to the Last Supper one last time. Matthew 26:23 says this. Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. But the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him." Oh, I love that line. In other words, yes, Jesus is being betrayed by his close friend. Yes, this looks like total disaster. Yes, there's nothing anyone can do to stop it now, but everything is still going to go exactly as God wants it to go. Now, friends, if you had been there in those moments, that's not what you would have thought at all. Right? You would have thought, no, if Judas betrays Jesus, then every good thing that's been happening in our lives is now going to be sabotaged and destroyed. You would have thought, that's it. The world is over now. Now we have no hope and no future. You would have thought, now everything is so messed up, nobody, not even God, could fix it now. And you would have been totally wrong. Because no matter what Judas does or fails to do, the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. In other words, God's plan and purpose prevails no matter what. It doesn't depend on you doing everything right, and it's not derailed even if you do everything wrong. Even if you mess up and lose your job. Even if your marriage fails. Even if you struggle with an addiction your whole life and never quite kick it. Even if you're not the mom or dad that you'd like to be and should be. Even if you don't give or pray or worship or serve like you really should. God's purpose and plan prevails anyway. It does not all depend on you, and it cannot be derailed by you. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. I mean, I can't think of a more hopeful message than that. And God proclaims it to us today in the most unexpected place of all. The story of Judas. Let's bow our heads and pray.